I got home at 4:47 a.m., the streetlights still humming in the quiet neighborhood. My boots clicked across the porch as I fumbled for the key, an old brass thing I'd picked up at a flea market in Savannah last summer. In my hand, the weight of exhaustion from a 20-hour ER shift, every patient's face still hovering at the edges of my vision. I should have felt relief sliding into the sanctuary I shared with Emily. Instead, the front door creaked open, and I froze. There was laughter, soft, familiar female laughter, and then a low male voice replying with the exact words I'd promised to share with Emily on our second anniversary. "I love you." My blood turned to ice. In the hallway beyond the foyer, the door to our bedroom lay cracked just enough for two warm bodies and whispered betrayals to escape like a cruel wind. Heart hammering, I leaned against the doorjamb. The hallway light cast long shadows over our wedding photos, smiling faces on the mantel, the Appalachian Trail we'd hiked last fall, the prom-esque shot from my cousin's wedding, where Emily wore that mint green dress I'd always loved. Everything I thought I knew about us refracted into shards of doubt. The hardwood floor felt sudden and slippery beneath my bare feet. I hovered for a heartbeat. Staying would be confirmation, leaving would look like cowardice. My chest tightened, a pressure point behind my sternum. I could hear them more clearly now. Emily giggling at something Jordan said. Jordan, our neighbor from 2 doors down, that scruffy guy who always borrowed sugar and chipped in on bills when the power went out last winter. Adrenaline surged. Without thinking, I pushed the door open. The room was dim, curtains drawn against the pale sky. My eyes adjusted to the silhouette of Emily's hair, damp from a shower, draped across shoulders that had held me when I got news of my father's stroke last December. And next to her, Jordan, smiling with that lazy confidence I once admired, the same grin he'd given me over beers when he thought I wouldn't mind one more nightcap. Their bodies froze, a portrait of guilt exposed under a single lamp's glow. My Emily's eyes flew wide, bathwater blue and glistening. Jordan's freckles seemed to leap off his cheeks. That moment stretched like a cracked film reel. The scent of jasmine from her shampoo, the metallic tinge of my own blood pounding in my ears, the shredded echo of "I love you" still hanging in the air. I think I said something, my voice a brittle whisper. "What the hell is this?" But the sound didn't feel like mine. It was stranger in my mouth, as if I were watching myself from the corner of the room. Emily's lips quivered. Jordan cleared his throat, stepping forward like he had some right. Every memory of our first apartment, the nights we stayed up planning trips to Joshua Tree, the Sunday morning pancakes he stubbornly flipped burned hot in my gut. My hands curled into fists at my sides. The floorboards groaned under the weight of betrayal as I took a step forward, then paused, blinking back in anger so bright it blinded me. In the split second before I moved again, a wave of questions crashed in. How long? Where else did this happen? Was every "I love you" we shared just part of a lie? The hush after my shift spun me around, a cold spotlight on the truth I could no longer deny. Silence pressed in. The only sound was the hum of the streetlight outside, a mechanical drone mocking the collapse of everything I thought was safe. My knuckles rapped against Jordan's door 2 nights later, right after my shift, because I needed answers now, not peace. He swung it open before I finished my first question. His surprise was as staged as his invitations over beers. I demanded to know when it started. His jaw clenched, voice low. A couple weeks. 2 weeks of stolen mornings. 2 weeks of rehearsed lies. I stepped back and felt my blood scrape against my ribs. I muttered something about trust and left before his half-apology could finish. Back in my car, I dialed Emily's number and sent the call straight to voicemail. Every ring throbbed in my temples as I fished out my phone recordings. The late-night giggles, the breathy "I love you," no longer mine. I clipped the audio, rewound to each incriminating promise, and listened again, each play a scalpel cutting deeper. Shower water streamed cold down my back that night, but it couldn't rinse the sting. Instead, I stood there under fluorescent torture, heart hammering like an angered drum, plotting mental justice. I pictured Jordan's smug face, Emily's tear-streaked apologies, and I cataloged them all under betrayals to never forget. I tried to anchor myself in routine. At the hospital, I scrubbed in for surgeries, but hands that once steadied scalpels trembled. A nurse caught me spacing out over an IV line and passed me coffee, black like the mood settling in my chest. I nodded thanks, but caffeine did nothing against the corrosive ache. On breaks, I texted neighbors, subtle probes about late-night noises near our building. Some laughed it off, others said they'd heard muffled voices. Each reply validated the suspicion I was still trying to deny. That evening, I finally forced a conversation with Emily. She met me in our living room, clutching a throw pillow like armor. Her eyes were red, her voice a trembling whisper, "I'm sorry." But her sorry sounded empty, an echo of every promise she'd broken. I showed her the call logs, the messages, proof she couldn't unravel with tears. My own words caught in my throat when I asked, "Why?" She said, "Love just happened." Regret followed, and then she begged for forgiveness. But forgiveness felt like surrender. As she spoke, I realized that our shared apartment, once my refuge, had become a place of ghosts. Every echo of our laughter was now a mocking reminder. I pushed past her apology, gathered my coat, and walked out into the night, knowing I couldn't return to the home that no longer felt like mine. The night air was damp, carrying the distant echo of crickets and the hum of passing cars. I walked without direction, coat collar turned up against a chill I couldn't quite feel. Every street lamp cast long, angled shadows that seemed to chase me forward, as though even the darkness knew I needed space. I found myself on the edge of the Riverwalk, where the city lights shimmered off the water in fractured lines. It was the same spot Emily and I had once shared coffee at dawn, talking about future plans, for maybe a house in Charleston, or that road trip to Big Sur we never took. The memories felt like glass shards in my chest. I dug my hands into my pockets and pulled out my phone. Her last text, "Please talk to me," hovered on the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to press call. Instead, I dropped it, listening to it hit the pavement and skitter into a gutter. It felt symbolic, cutting one more thread to a life that was unraveling beyond repair. A jogger paused beside me, concerned at first, then offering a soft, "You okay?" I nodded, mumbled something about a long shift and lost sleep, and kept moving. The world went on. People laughing under neon signs, a stray dog trotting after its owner, jazz notes drifting from a late-night cafe window. But inside, everything was silent. My sanctuary had morphed into a courtroom, where I was both judge and the only witness to my own downfall. By the time I made it back to my car, my legs felt like lead. I sat behind the wheel and exhaled slowly, tracing raindrops that started to fall on the windshield. Rain always washed things away, at least for a moment. Maybe it could wash this hurt too. The wipers swept the droplets in steady rhythms, like a heartbeat, urging me to decide, stay and try to rebuild, or leave the apartment and the man-made trap of memories behind for good. I called in the next day to take some leave. At the ER, I was a ghost in a white coat. Colleagues asked if I was okay, but I shrugged it off. My mind was too busy charting the course of betrayal, where it began, how it deepened. I wondered if there was ever a moment she didn't feel guilty, some split second where truth might have sprung out and stopped it all. That evening, I packed a duffel bag with the essentials: scrubs, my favorite coffee mug from residency, dog-eared paperback of Hemingway's short stories, no apology note, nothing to tie me back. As I closed the apartment door for the last time, I turned the key in the lock and let it click home. The hallway felt empty, the air freed of whispered lies. I exhaled, feeling the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. I drove away under the soft glow of streetlights, heading west. No specific destination, just the promise that someday, somewhere, I could find a place where "I love you" wouldn't once again become the knife turned in my heart. The highway ribboned out before me, lanes disappearing into the low-hung clouds on the horizon. I kept the radio off, letting the engine's hum score my thoughts. Every mile felt like a small victory against the ache in my chest. I watched the speedometer edge past 65, then 70, then 75, until the speed limit signs became too scarce to count. At a rest stop somewhere past Richmond, I pulled over, lit a cigarette, even though I'd quit years ago, and inhaled the smoky comfort of defiance. It burned my lungs, but it kept me awake and reminded me I was alive. I opened the Hemingway paperback, but the words blurred like tears on a window pane. Instead, I scrolled through my phone's gallery. A selfie Emily snapped the morning of our last vacation, the sunset golden behind us, the time-stamped coffee mug shot from my first day as an attending, the photo of my dad recovering in his hospital bed, a shaky thumbs up for good measure. Each image was a relic of the life she had helped build, and of the life she shattered. By dusk, I found a small motel off exit 83. The neon sign buzzed vacancy in weary red letters. My room was the kind with striped carpet, a flickering lamp, and a view of the parking lot where a single truck idled. I checked in under my name, paid cash, and locked the door behind me. In the dingy bathroom mirror, I stared at a man whose eyes held too many sleepless nights, whose jaw was set in brittle resignation. I yanked off my shirt and peeled open a small bottle of aspirin, swallowing two with a gulp of lukewarm tap water. I spent the night unpacking memories more than clothes, sifting through the playlist we made together, pausing on songs that once felt like the soundtrack to our life, now just ghost notes in a requiem. I deleted half of them, leaving only the ones that spoke to hope rather than hurt. I wrote a few sentences in a notebook, raw thoughts from my own therapy. I survived betrayal. I will survive healing. Morning came gray and drizzly. I brewed instant coffee in the tiny kitchenette and stared out the window at the wet asphalt. Rain was washing the world clean. Maybe it could cleanse me too, if only I let it. I texted my sister back home. Need a place to crash a few days. Promise I'm okay. And I meant it, because for the first time in weeks, I believed I might actually be. The stranger's whisper of "I love you" still haunted me, but I was learning to redirect that whisper inward, shaping it into a promise. I love myself enough to walk away. The sky cleared just enough by mid-morning for me to spot a shaft of sunlight cutting through the motel room blinds, painting stripes of hope across the bedspread. I stood and stretched, muscles stiff from the night's uneasy sleep, then gathered my things. Before I left, I knelt beside the bed and closed my eyes, an impulse born of my grandmother's Sunday prayers back in Georgia. "Lord, give me strength," I whispered, the words feeling both foreign and familiar. It wasn't about asking for vengeance or scolding Emily's betrayal. It was about reclaiming the shard of myself I'd lost in the aftermath. Back on the road, I tuned the radio to an old country station, and George Strait's voice carried me across state lines. "I believe the best is yet to come." I smiled at the irony. Strait could never dodge bullets for him. But the melody stirred something in me, resilience. Over the next few hours, I navigated back roads, stopping at a roadside chapel draped in magnolias. The white steeple looked like a lighthouse for broken souls. I slipped inside, seating myself on a pew worn smooth by generations of confession and communion. The scent of hymnals and candle wax wrapped around me. I didn't pray or speak. I just sat in silence, letting my heart unclench a little with every slow breath. When I emerged, dusk had fallen. I pulled over at a small diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s. Chrome stools, neon open sign buzzing outside. I ordered black coffee and meatloaf, the waitress giving me a sympathetic nod when I asked for extra gravy. There was no rush here. I sketched a quick plan in my notebook. Find a sublet near the hospital, reestablish a routine, and pick up guitar lessons again. Something Emily teased me about but never encouraged. I wanted to reclaim the me she once said she loved. The next day, I rolled into the city where I'd done my residency, heart pounding less with dread and more with purpose. I found a modest two-bedroom place not far from work, painted pale blue like a calm sea. As I handed over the deposit, I caught myself smiling, small but real. That evening, I unpacked my guitar, the wood cool under my fingertips, and played the first chords of Wagon Wheel, the tune Emily and I used to sing along to on long drives. My voice cracked at first, but by the chorus, there was a sturdiness to it, a declaration. I wasn't broken beyond repair. Weeks turned into months. My shifts at the ER sharpened my focus. There was something healing about holding a stranger's hand through their darkest hours. Outside work, I joined a small faith-based community group that met every Wednesday at a local Baptist church. Nothing evangelical, just neighbors sharing coffee and scripture readings. I spoke when I felt ready, offering honest fragments of my story and discovering that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but a bridge to empathy. I never chased Emily's forgiveness. I didn't need to. My closure lay in the life I began to rebuild. One crisp Sunday morning, I stood in a field of golden sunlight as the organist struck the final chord of the pastor's sermon. When the congregation stood to sing Amazing Grace, I felt a swell of gratitude, not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd gained. A stronger sense of self, a renewed faith in love's possibility, and the willingness to let the past be exactly that. As my voice joined the hymn, I realized the night my home became a stranger's was not the end of my story, but the prologue to a version of me unafraid to say, I deserve better, and ready to receive it. Summer rolled in with the hum of cicadas and bright mornings that tasted of possibility. I settled into my new routine. Pre-dawn coffee runs to Mocha Haven, scrubbing in for morning trauma rounds, evening guitar practice on the balcony overlooking a quiet Elm Street. The apartment felt mine for the first time, each chipped tile in the bathroom and scuffed plank in the living room, a reminder that I'd earned this space. No whisper of betrayal haunted the hallways. Instead, my prayers in the dark came back to me as whispers of hope. One Thursday night, after a particularly grueling double shift, I ducked into a small indie bookstore cafe tucked between a florist and a tailor. I'd promised myself I'd start writing again. Journaling felt safer than Tinder, and I carried my notebook and a pen pressed to the top of my pocket. Inside, the air smelled of old pages and honey lavender tea. I ordered a chamomile and found a corner table. That's where I met Hannah. She wore a denim jacket covered in enamel pins, tiny verdicts on life's truths, and jeans frayed at the knees. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, serious but curious. When I asked if the seat across from her was taken, she laughed, gesturing to the spare chair and her open laptop. Conversation spilled out as effortlessly as coffee. She was a speech therapist who volunteered at a children's literacy project. I told her about saving lives on the ER floor. Neither of us downplayed our struggles, but neither did we linger on them. By the time the sky outside had turned ink blue, she'd sketched me a map of her favorite hiking trail, and I'd promised to join her next Sunday. On the trail, with mist drifting through the pines, I realized I was capable of trust again. Hannah's steps were sure and light. When she looked back to check on me, I felt seen in a way Emily's apologies never achieved. We talked about our families, our faith journeys. She'd been raised Episcopalian, I'd been Baptist, and how our beliefs shaped the way we cared for others. I shared the wounds I'd carried, and her compassion soothed the raw edges. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt human. Over the weeks, our dates unfolded like pages in a novel I could barely set down. Tuesday night jazz at a speakeasy, Fridays learning to cook Cajun gumbo in her tiny kitchen, Saturday morning volunteer shifts reading to kids at the community center. Each outing wove new threads of joy, laughter, and even tears. This time, tears of gratitude rather than heartache. We prayed grace before meals together, and when our hands met across a picnic blanket, the spark wasn't guilt, but anticipation. One Sunday in late August, as golden light dappled the church courtyard, I stood beside her at the baptismal font for a child in our group. Water shimmered on her small forehead. Families gathered in hushed praise. In that moment, I felt the full circle of my journey, the betrayal that shattered my world, the long nights of solitude and reflection, the reassembling of my faith and identity, and now the quiet promise of new beginnings. Hannah caught my gaze, her storm-gray eyes warm with understanding. I whispered, "Thank you for believing in this broken heart." She smiled, reaching for my hand. The home I once knew as mine had become a stranger's in a bitter twist of fate. But this home, built with honesty, shared laughter, and steady faith, was ours to shape together. And as the choir's final harmonies lifted into the summer sky, I realized that love, when tended with patience and truth, could heal even the deepest scars. The night my home became a stranger's was not the end. It was the catalyst that led me here, to a place where I love you felt like the purest blessing instead of a cruel betrayal. I finally understood that sometimes the greatest acts of faith come after the ground beneath you gives way, and you learn to build anew.